Emma with the Teachers Guild, and we are so excited to have an incredible group of panelists with our expert chat on empathy today. For everyone out there listening or listening afterwards, thanks so much for chiming in and tuning in. We're excited to hear some really incredible perspectives on empathy for our collaboration we're running right now. And the question we're running is, how might we build empathy for and across students so that we serve their diverse needs and better understand each other? And we have to better understand kind of the dimensions of empathy and kind of what it really takes to develop empathy in schools. We are going to have this expert chat with some really great people who all have approached empathy in their work in different ways. So joining us today, we have Sara Heinrich, the program manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We have Tristan Richardson, who is an award-winning teacher in Richland School District, South Carolina. We have Divya Viswanathan, a design researcher at IDEO, and I probably butchered your last name, so you might have to correct me on that. And Gupta, the director of secondary education in the Worthington City Schools, Ohio. And so all of them have some really interesting different perspectives on empathy, and we'll get to hear from them today on what it really takes, and some opportunities that we can explore as a network of educators as we about to embark on this design journey together. So to start us off, I'm gonna start with an icebreaker and have these incredible panelists introduce themselves. So the question is, who is your favorite teacher and why? Really quick kind of rapid fire, and we will start with Sara.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm Sara, and I work for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We exist to accelerate a transition to a circular economy, which is something that I can explain a little bit more about. And I manage the Schools and Colleges program, as well as our informal education program. My favorite teacher was probably my English teacher in high school. And the lasting impact she had on me, she was this incredible Indian woman, amazing kind of heritage and awareness of history. And she probably opened my heart and mind to post-colonial and feminist theory in a way that nobody else could have done.
Thank you. Next up, Tristan.
Hi, I'm Tristan Richardson, 7th and 8th grade middle school ELA teacher, and my favorite teacher would have to be during my career. At my previous school, I had a mentor who really took me under her wing and taught me about creating a rigorous environment for my students and having accountability and collaboration within my classroom, and that really was the jumping point to who I am as a teacher now and a lot of my pedagogical beliefs as a teacher now.
Divya?
Hi, I'm Divya Viswanathan. You got my surname almost right there, so not too far. And I'm a design researcher and systems designer at IDEO, and I spend a lot of time leading teams through empathy when it comes to projects, spending a lot of times in the school context. So this feels really special. This panel feels really special to be on. My favorite teacher was definitely back in design school. I had somebody who used to lead the foundation program, which is the first year of design, when you really have to kind of set the tone for what type of designer you will be. And she really kind of opened mine and my classmates' minds to what it means to design in so different contexts and different people who have very different lives and backgrounds. So I'm definitely inspired by her.
Great. And last but not least, Neil.
Good evening. So I'm just astounded by the people that are on the panel right now. So I'm going to try to hurry up and get done so I can hear from everybody else. But I'm currently the director of secondary education at Worthington City Schools. It's a suburb in Columbus, Ohio. And in high school, a rural community up in Ohio is where I grew up, and our high school counselor would be my go-to. And it was more of just kind of seeing that his belief in all kids, how he had developed relationships with all kids. It really felt like we were at his house after school was over. We'd all just hang out there, and it just kind of gave me a different glimpse of what an educator could be like, instead of just somebody you just kind of see it for a period, here or there at high school, but really get to know. And just because of his passion and fostering of relationships, that kind of got me into the door of, it really didn't matter what subject I wanted to teach. I knew that I just wanted to connect with kids.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm also blown away by the panelists and what an opportunity it is to hear from you all today. It looks like we have a couple people chiming in, and before we dive into some questions that we've got planned, I just want to encourage anyone who's tuning in right now to share your questions with us, either right here in the chat, or you can share on Twitter with the hashtag #BuildEmpathy, and we'll include some of your questions in this panel. So to kick us off, I thought I would just sort of ask a question very generally about the why. Why, in your all's perspective, like, why is it important right now to focus on empathy in schools? And why is this an important social and emotional sort of skill for students right now? And I would love to kick off this question with our educator, Tristan.
Well, I think that empathy is important just because even looking in the classroom that you all came to visit us in, I think that those students are some of the students that a lot of people kind of are hesitant to work with and don't want to try many things with them. And a lot of it is because they haven't had those experiences of collaboration and interaction with other people on that level. And some of that comes with empathy. Like if I'm working with someone and they don't get it, without that empathy, I think their first reaction is to insult or yell or fuss or get frustrated. So I think the empathy carries a long way because it provides what in education I think we call a lot of times soft skills that they need to get to the point or the meat of the lesson, which consequently will carry them further in life when you're even in the real world. So I think that's also what's really important about empathy, is it's applicable to beyond just the classroom. It's kind of like problem solving. Like you want to teach your kids problem solving, and that's going to go way beyond any book that I read with them in class.
Absolutely. Sara, I'd love to jump to you. Do you have some other additional thoughts on that?
Thank you. Yeah, building on that, I think for me, it definitely matters a lot on that very personal level and interpersonal level for students, but also, especially following the political discourse at the moment, I think there's something about the complexity of the world and students needing to be able to not just rationally understand that complexity and being able to discuss and analyze it, but a counterpart to system thinking is often sensing a system and kind of getting into a space, social field, you would say. And then I refer a lot to, I guess, the work of Peter Senge and Mette Böll, who've thought a lot about these things. So I think that is why it's probably now more important than ever to build these capacities in the next generation, so that they can shape a world that is ever more complex.
Definitely. I love the connection between empathy and systems thinking and seeing yourself as a part of a larger whole. That's a really interesting additional build to why empathy, and also relates to, Tristan, to what you had been talking about with this problem solving skill set and taking on challenges that exist out in the world. I'd love, Neil, do you have any additional thoughts on why empathy right now as you see it from this sort of district landscape?
Yeah, so in our school district, we've seen an increase in our number of kids, so that we've had a positive gain with that. But what we've seen was not just the increase in the numbers, but the diversity that we've had from the kids coming from different countries, from different backgrounds, socioeconomically, just the ways of different thinking that's going on. And while that was happening last year, I'm so proud that our district was going through a branding process and going through a new mission statement, vision. And we came up with a new mission statement with a community that says our mission is to empower a community of learners who will change the world. And I love that idea about empowering, and not just students, but that also goes with adults and our community, not just our staff. But what we talked about was our chief academic officer, Jennifer Weems, said, before we can have people change the world, they have to understand the world first. And we can't just have this factual understanding of, gosh, there's a lot of people, and take quizzes and tests that, gosh, there's a lot of people that are, in famine right now, or there's a lot of problems going on right now, and have a very textbook, understanding of it. But they really have to have that idea to understand we have students in our classrooms that are coming from such different places than what, as educators, we may have ever experienced in our lives. And if we really want to understand how to help unlock and make them feel comfortable, make them really educate them, we can't just jump into the test scores and worrying about reading and mathematics. We have to make sure we're really making them feel comfortable and really trying to understand where they're from. So, we talked about that. We've got, in our district, we've got 4 goals and 4 district goals. And they're very lofty, heady goals about, getting test scores up and doing different things. One of them is about empathy. And I'm very proud of our district to understand that is such a huge, complex goal to try to cover, but it is something that we know that has to move the needle if we're really going to actually do anything that has lasting impressions beyond when kids graduate from high school.
Mm-hmm. I love that sentiment. Before we have students want to change the world, we actually have to have students understand the world first. And I think that also taps into the power of design and design thinking as well, right? That if you want to tackle a human problem, you begin with empathy, and that feels so core. So thanks so much for sharing those perspectives. The next thing I'd love to ask you all is just about, okay, so we've set up this and established empathy is important right now. Okay, empathy is important for systems thinking, for tackling real world challenges. How does empathy happen? How do you develop empathy? And as you think about this question, educators are out there right now in this design journey thinking about pathways to developing greater empathy, not just for their students, but also between students. So we'd love to hear a little bit about how, in your perspectives, how does empathy happen? And to kick us off, I'd love to really start with our kind of empathy guru, Divya. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think empathy happens and what are some pathways for it.
Sure. There are so many ways it can happen, and I think more so now than ever before, there are ways and techniques that use media and technology in such interesting ways. So of course, while one of the greater ways to kind of go about it is to kind of, especially within the classroom, I've seen such amazing examples of teachers model that behavior and be vulnerable themselves in the classroom context. I was recently part of a class where a teacher in a social science classroom was kind of talking about her own identity and her own kind of stereotypes against other people's identities, and how she was being so open and vulnerable that kind of it forced the kind of students to reflect that behavior. So I thought there was just something really positive about the way she was modeling that. In the work that we do at IDEO, there's kind of ways we do it with in-depth conversations and interviews, but also using technology like videos and virtual reality and all these amazing tools that are available to us that really take us to parts of the world that we're not in, but we can learn so much about.
Any of those tools, are there any particular tools right now that you're excited about that you've been using or playing with or testing?
There's a team currently that I really kind of love what they're doing. So they're traveling around the world. This is not a project that I'm part of, but I've just been witnessing it, so it's top of mind. They've been kind of traveling around the world, talking to families about their experiences on holidays. And what they're doing is they're using Instagram. And so they've created a kind of custom channel to kind of share those stories with everyone. And it's literally all it is a short video or a photograph with a kind of a quote that kind of stands out. But just those in the moment little nuggets and stories kind of takes you to all these parts of the world and into these people's living rooms. And it's so powerful. I really kind of, I'm really enjoying that stream right now.
That's awesome. And what I love about that is it's, you know, showing how an existing tool that is used for other reasons can also be used to open up a channel for empathy. So that's really, thanks for sharing that. Tristan, I'd love to turn it back to you, you know, being in the classroom right now and actively working to establish a safe and supportive classroom environment. And context, I had the opportunity to visit Tristan's classroom. It's pretty amazing. From your perspective, what are some ways that you work to develop empathy, not just for your students, but also between your students?
Well, I think what Divya was saying about exposure has been a part of it. And when I'm planning units, trying to find ways to introduce ideas and topics that may challenge them on multiple levels. And then also being very transparent with them. I just had a conversation with one of my students yesterday in the hallway after he started crying because he was just being really hard on himself because he hadn't gotten his work done, and he was saying how well he had been doing. And I was just honest with him. I was like, I'm having a hard time this week too. I have a long list of things to get done. Y'all's papers aren't graded. I'm still trying to plan for tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so just letting him know that, you know, we're all human, and I totally get where you're coming from. And that's where I can, you know, meet you in the middle and understand like, hey, you need more time. But I do that, I think, with all of my kids. When I make a mistake, I let them know that I've made mistakes. So that way, when they make mistakes too, I can be they know that I can be understanding, because everything's not black and white, and we're all not perfect. And I think they like when adults apologize to them, and they like when adults admit that they need help themselves, and understanding as well.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point of view. And to go deeper on that a little bit, I think there are many teachers, I know, you know, even when thinking back to my own teaching days, where it feels scary to do that. You know, teachers expected to, you know, hold the line and kind of keep everything in motion and be these leaders. You know, what advice might you give to an educator who feels that tension of like, how can I, you know, I'm feeling scared to be vulnerable in front of my classroom. How have you, is it a matter of just taking a plunge and doing it, or what advice might you give to an educator who feels that tension?
Well, I think, first of all, working with middle schoolers, they really don't let you can't be fake. You have to be very genuine with them. And if not, they're going to call you out on it. So I think really just taking that plunge and realizing that even if you let them know that you've made mistakes, or you apologize, or you're vulnerable with them on many levels about, you know, your beliefs or your biases, that they'll appreciate that more. And I think at first when I started doing it, because I can remember the first time I've ever apologized to a group of kids, I think that was 3-4 years ago. I remember it very distinctly, and it was awkward for me. Because I felt like, okay, well, if I do this now, they're going to look at me differently, or they're not going to respect me later, or they're not going to listen to me anymore. But really, it was literally gasps around the room. And I heard kids saying, oh my God, a teacher just apologized to us for what happened. And I think after that moment, it really builds a relationship and a bond with you and your kids, because that means that you're a person they can trust, and your intentions are genuine and your intentions are good. So you just have to do it and kind of let that part of you go as an adult and as a teacher.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. Neil, I'd love to hear from you. What do you all see at what's working in Worthington?
So yeah, we've been a year in this journey of conversations, and really that's what it is. You know, it's just about opening up the dialogue, and Divya hit that perfectly as far as just really trying to understand cultures, trying to understand other people, and you know, also Tristan said it right with the idea about our biases. And so we've been doing a lot of implicit bias training, where we're really starting to kind of overtly have conversations about what are our biases. And you know, that's tough, you know, to really start to put on paper, to have conversations. You have to create a very safe place for staff members to be able to have that. Students in a classroom, the teacher has to really create a safe place for open dialogue to happen. As we're really taking a look back at some of our response to intervention programs, it couples perfectly, and we start talking about, Divya talked about fostering questions, and you know, we're having conversations about the 5 whys deep. You know, well, when we start talking about root cause, when students make, you know, say things or do things, and we start to peel that onion and start to ask them, well, why did you do that? You know, that sometimes they don't know, and you have to just but we have to be patient with them, and we have to pull, and they may say something after the first response, but we have to keep probing, you know, and really start to ask questions with them. So it really has given us that opportunity and that permission to be able to say, please do that. And believe it or not, you know, I think we as adults, we need that permission. And you'd think that we wouldn't need to do that or say that. But when we do that, we start modeling with each other and telling stories. And we say, you know, and the district spotlights those stories, then people start to go, you know what, I could do that too. You know, in a situation I had last week, I should have done that. And so now we're trying to capture all different, you know, situations and scenarios of where, you know, catch people doing it good, doing it right, when they take that extra second and time to do that. And so that's kind of how we're starting to tackle it here at our district.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
So I'd love to kind of go on to the next question. And this is a question about this tension that has come up with in schools, and teachers have kind of come to talk to us a little bit about the tension that they feel within empathy, which is this concept of kind of sharedship versus witnesship. So there's this idea that, you know, you can develop empathy if you've had the shared experience, and if you haven't had that shared experience, you can cultivate channels of you know, trying to understand that experience. But versus witnesship, saying, you know, I see that, I don't know what that experience is, but I'm there, I'm compassionate. And you know, a question came up in a visit in South Carolina, where it was like, you know, is empathy a form of stealing? And how do we, you know, when is it right to sort of say, like, look, I don't empathize with this, but I want to know more, and I want to lend an ear with curiosity. And so would love to know kind of more and hear more about the tensions that you all have seen in your work cultivating empathy, what your perspectives are within that tension. I would love to first start with Divya.
What a great question. And it takes me back to so many experiences I've had. I've been in kind of households in like Siberian Russia with people who have increasingly like terminal diseases. There have been in like rural farmers' households in India. And I have nothing in common with these people. Like, we come from different backgrounds, we have different lives and stories. But I think there's so much you can bring to the experience with that sense of and taking kind of witnesship to the point of really trying to understand, or using your logical mind to unpack some of those questions. So what Neil was talking about with the 5 whys, really drilling down to understanding rationally, if not emotionally at first, what drives people to do the things that they do? What are the underlying kind of motivations behind the things that they do? I was recently kind of in an awkward situation for a researcher, where I was in America doing kind of a research project, and I had to, I was sitting across the table from somebody with clearly very distinctly different political opinions and from me. And the conversation was about addressing some of those things, like, you know, climate change and questions that we had very differing opinions on. And I really kind of had to be the researcher who asked, why do you think that, instead of kind of going against that with a position that I already had. And kind of that shift between responding as yourself and responding as with that mind of empathy is really kind of using your curiosity to unpack what the other side sees. And I think there's so much value in that. So I do think there is a value for witnessship, if done right, if done with the right attitude and done with the right questions. There's so much value you can draw from that.
Thanks for sharing that. Sara, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this as well. Oh. Sorry, can have you start on again? Apologies.
Okay. I'm just wondering whether this binary, and while I was listening to Divya's stories, has a third leg to it. And I think actually kind of true empathy and the way that I've also seen it in the classrooms that I've worked in grows out of listening and hearing. Mm-hmm. And actually, that is a process and a skill that I feel needs to be learned. Mm-hmm. And it's great to acknowledge also as a teacher that we're not always listening. And I love the point that Tristan made about, apologizing and saying, actually, I wasn't listening, or I haven't heard what you were actually trying to tell me there. So I think there's something that starts with really just hearing even things that are incredibly uncomfortable, especially when it comes to people who have different opinions about certain things, but really hearing that rather than trying to project what you might want to hear. And I think that is that is something that I constantly work on myself as an adult, and I think there's so much value in giving students the room to develop that as well.
Yeah, that Sara, your answer made me think a little bit about these tensions that we're exploring right now in empathy. And so we're running creative tensions events throughout the month of March, where communities can organize and basically explore empathy from these various angles and perspectives and move across the line to better understand where they themselves stand and kind of engage in dialogue. And you had started your answer with this empathy is a process of listening. And one of the prompts in this tension is, empathy, gut reaction, or cultivated practice. So I'd love to hear where do we all stand on that tension? Is it a gut reaction, or is it a cultivated practice? And Neil, I see you nodding. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Well, I mean, the goal is that we try to make it as much, that we practice it and really try to put ourselves in those experiences. It has to be something that we overtly have to be mindful of. Again, it's those implicit things that we are fighting against constantly. We should embrace who we are as people and our heritage and our backgrounds and our experiences, but we have to also know that that's not how the world is for everybody. This goes back to also the earlier question too. We have to put ourselves in those situations. And so if it means that we go see the world and we go, and maybe it means going on a plane, but maybe it also means just going and talking to the people that are around us and sharing our stories. But sometimes, we in our district, we went through a poverty simulation, and I've been through different activities like that before. But the way that this was constructed within the course of, I think it was 3 hours, I was exhausted. I was exhausted, and I was so mad because usually I'm the guy that could, play the game for a little bit of time, and it won't affect me personally. I can play the game as a separate person and it not affect me. But by the time it was over, I had an emotional disgust of the world around the situation that I was in with this simulation that I was given, and I know that that's only a small 3-hour experience, but it really was lasting. It has been lasting. Now, I don't think I look back only at for the next 10 years and never do it again. I think we continually put ourselves in those different models. I think a reason that I'm here at this chat tonight is IDEO has actually partnered up with School Retool and the Gates Foundation to put together a student challenge that's going on nationally. And so next week, and I've done this before last year, but I get to go through the eyes of a student and shadow a student all day for at a high school. And I've done that before. I've been in classrooms. I'm in classrooms all the time. But to actually go from all day long, last year the first 3 periods, it wasn't the teacher's fault at all, but all 3 of them had quizzes. And I just was tired. I was so blitzed, and I forgot that I had to go to the restroom at certain times, that I couldn't have coffee, at my disposal like I usually do. And really how that fatigue happens of just trying to hang on for the ride all day long. So I think when we put ourselves in those experiences that we have to put ourselves into, that I go back to that, the gut part is there, and we have to kind of suppress that as much to bring out those opportunities and say we've got to make those overt experiences.
Yeah. Tristan, that's Neil, thanks for sharing that. And the shadow student is a really interesting opportunity to highlight as well, because that is also that cultivated practice. It's not just that because you're in schools all day, you're cultivating the empathy for students, but that's interesting. Tristan, I'd love to hear your perspective on that same question. Gut reaction versus cultivated practice. What are you seeing with students?
I think it's cultivated practice. I remember when you asked the question, we were at R2I2, and I didn't go to either side, because even though there's things that I was thinking about myself, and I know you said, and even the students that I observe, I guess it seems like a gut reaction, but something I feel like had to take place to make you have that as an immediate reaction, whether it be the way your parents or whoever raised you, or the life experiences that you've had that will allow you to show that empathy. Because I can even think about friends that I had in high school, and after graduating, we went our different ways, and in college, I had totally different experiences, or they may have not gone to college, stayed here and got married and had kids. And when we have conversations about different people, different things, different experiences, my understanding of it is a little different because of what I've seen. And I think that's the same thing with my students. On a simple level, if we talk about food, for example, a lot of my students who don't have experiences or exposure are quick to call certain foods disgusting or nasty, but then you have the kids who travel every summer and try new things, and they're more understanding of those things, and which opens up the avenue for them to be, they're more willing to try new things and understand different people because they've had that initial piece of, like that seed has been planted.
Yeah. I'd love to explore another tension that we're exploring here in this collaboration, which is around what is required for empathy. So I'm going to read a prompt and would love to hear where you all stand on it. So the prompt is empathy requires, and on either side, it's trust versus self-awareness. So if you were forced to one side of those words, where are you clustering around? And would love to open it up with Divya. Empathy requires trust versus self-awareness. What do you think?
Wow, it's a difficult one. I think, kind of alluding to the previous tension that you had as well, I think there has to be, I would err on the side of trust, kind of trusting the process, the process that empathy will kind of get you there. I think self-awareness is great, but you have to kind of trust that the empathy will kind of help you unlock certain kind of new understanding, will help you check in your biases, will help you check against your assumptions. And I think for me that, and it leads to kind of building also trust. So I would be on that side. That's a difficult one though.
Definitely a difficult one. Neil, what do you think?
I agree with the trust. I think it goes back to, things that I've just said before, as far as, we may not think that nobody thinks that they're necessarily at face value somebody that doesn't accept other people. We all want to believe that. And we all want to believe that we care about all kids, and that we're not doing anything to ever alienate or exclude kids or adults around us. But it happens, and there's things that we do, and it's implicit, it's unconscious, and so we have to just trust. I love how Divya said, trust the process. It is a process-driven, concept that can be delivered. You have to put yourself out of that comfort zone. You do have to put yourself in a different place, and you have to trust that experience is going to make you a better person, and not close yourself off from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sara, what about you?
Yeah, it is super difficult. And I tend to think that actually, yes, trust is super important. But I think trust is something that is built over time and potentially starts with people being self-aware of what they're doing and not doing. So I would actually, and maybe just to be a little bit more on the other side, I think I'd say self-awareness plays a huge role, especially, and I would agree with what everybody has said before, with the fact that empathy is something that is a process rather than a gut reaction. So it is a way of thinking, a way of sensing that can be trained and developed, and being aware of what is going on inside you will also help you, I think, in having a greater feeling for nuances of what might be going on inside another person.
Yeah, I think that is interesting to think even about the connection. Does trust lead to self-awareness, or could self-awareness lead to trust? And thinking about the interplay even between those two concepts, that's interesting. And potentially interesting too for educators to consider as they're going about designing new solutions to cultivate empathy, where they start that journey. This tension makes me think back to, Tristan, what you had talked about in creating a trusting environment in your classroom by being vulnerable, and modeling that kind of behavior. So thanks for sharing those different perspectives. So I have kind of a couple questions left. We've talked about why empathy is important, and we've talked about kind of how it happens, and explored maybe some of the limits of empathy and its dimensions. And in that, we've touched a little bit already upon this, but I'd love to hear about the things that are barriers to cultivating empathy. So, when is it hard to develop empathy? What are the challenges in developing empathy? And maybe some of these perspectives will help to also help educators think about what to chip away at as they're seeking to develop more inclusive, empathetic classroom environments. So thinking about the barriers of empathy, I'd love to kick it off with Neil. Neil, it seems like your district is doing a lot and is really taking this on. Could you tell us a little bit about that journey and maybe some of the barriers you've seen to developing greater empathy in school systems? Sure.
Now, I'll give you three of them that seem to keep coming up over and over again as far as barriers. The first one, and the funny thing is nothing has to do with money. I think so. To go out there, I don't want people to feel like they have to purchase something, buy something in order to build this. But it takes time. I mean, I think the first barrier is that it takes time. It takes time for us to have these conversations as adults with, to go through professional development. So that's time obviously less with something else. And as we talked about having those conversations in your classroom, you have to be willing to say, I'm willing to go that extra step, just like Tristan talked about, to say, look, I'm not going to teach a subject content area for the next 5 minutes, but we're going to talk about the culture of our classroom, and then that's got to be okay. I mean, you have to have that trust that that's fine. So time is one. The second one is that I hear a lot from teachers is they feel like they have to be an expert first before they can do this. So a lot of them will confess and say, I am a math teacher, or I'm a Spanish teacher. I teach content, but talking about broaching conversations like this is way out of my comfort zone, and I am not the one who's an expert for it. So that's a barrier that there's a belief there that they have to have some type of expertise or credential or a class or something that goes along with it. And then the third one is just this, when you start to open those conversations, things could, obviously, you start pulling on the thread, and sometimes you get mess. I mean, lives are messy. And when you start to ask those 5 whys deep, kids start telling you some things that are very, very tough. And they're things that if you're not, you may just not be comfortable in responding with. And so there's a fear on how I have to respond for that. I've seen, the best thing that I can kind of say that overcomes all of these would be modeling. The more we model, the more we tell stories. I'm constantly learning from principals that are having these restorative justice conversations with our kids that have gotten into some trouble, and how they tell them, we're not throwing you away, we're not casting you aside, and what we're going to take care of you. And the way that they do that, I wish you could broadcast that, because it just shows so much love and healing, where families are coming together saying, we never knew how to respond to this. And if everyone else could see that on the staff, they would all just be able to go forward with it.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. And I love those 3 barriers: time, messiness, and that expertise barrier that I think exists not just in this area, but in so many in teaching. Tristan, I'd love for you to add on to this. What are some of the barriers you've seen in your career working as an educator?
Well, I think part of it is going back to the previous statement when we're talking about trust versus self-awareness. I think a lot of times educators don't understand who they are as people. So then that limits also and in terms of their identity as well. And then that also limits them from understanding their biases. And I know last year I'm working with a group, like an innovation team, where we're talking about culturally relevant pedagogy in the classroom. So while we were presenting, I made a list of all the things that I felt were part of my identity. And I'd never done that before. But then I started to think, like, if everybody did this, you can really start to see why some of your reactions to certain students are the way they are. And how that impacts you, and how really your job is to facilitate an education and those types of things for your kids, not necessarily to impose those biases on to your students. So when I did that, I thought that was helpful, and just learning more and more about myself. I think another thing is not quite understanding your particular privilege. So, and I don't necessarily mean in terms of race, because I think in society lately we've been talking a lot about privilege, but I think in a classroom, in a school, I as a teacher have a privilege and I have a power that can be abused or can be used to help my students in certain ways. So when people don't have that understanding, or they don't want to have those conversations with you, I think that really keeps empathy from developing, because we're not being vulnerable with each other, and we're not kind of shedding that top layer so that we really can get down to the root of who we are as people.
I'm just writing that down because that's such great wisdom, and I love how you put it, shed that top layer to get at the root of who we are as people. And it just seems like, again, that big theme of vulnerability, which really does require knowing the aspects of your own identity and where privilege shows up and how. And so thanks for sharing that. I want to get also Sara and Divya's perspective on the same question, and then we'll go to one last question. So let's start with Sara. Sara, what do you see as some barriers to developing deeper empathy?
Yes, thank you. I've just come back from a trip visiting a school and working with a range of different age groups, talking about the future of the economy. Because trying to understand essentially what are some of the fears, what are some of the hopes that students have. So my headspace currently is very much with what are the barriers to empathy for students? Where are they at? Where are we picking them up as educators? And I think largely it starts with a well-being question. So if I myself as a student don't need to worry about having enough food and the safety of my family and so on, and have these basic needs taken care of, I'm in a much better position to actually show empathy and to be in a headspace where I can hear other people and other perspectives. So I think in some educational spaces, in some schools, in some geographic regions, that is a big barrier to empathy in this. And I mean safety, not just in a physical sense, but like feeling safe in a space. So that leads me to also think about safe spaces and working with young people who are teenagers and who are trying to find their place in the world. It's very often also trying to find their place in a group. So I also think one of the big barriers to developing empathy can be that there is social capital that you can lose in a big group by showing a certain behavior, unless, and I think that is where there is a massive opportunity for educators, if it is a frame that a teacher provides and a process that you're guided through, it's not your decision anymore. So you have potentially less to lose when it comes to your own social capital. And I think the last barrier that comes to mind from a student perspective is that potentially, this comes out of conversation with a primary school teacher I had today, where we were talking about how there seem to be waves of caring in students, where when they're quite young, in kind of early primary ages, it's very much the me phase, the teacher called it. And then in kind of later primary, early middle school, they suddenly care, and they care about the planet and society and everything. But then in this kind of puberty phase, kind of late middle school, early high school, the teacher describes it like, no, then they're in another kind of me phase. So in a reality is now and only now matters. So I wonder whether another barrier to empathy is also a certain kind of foresight in not just over time, but also what you're sharing, what your stories can trigger in other people, and likewise what it triggers for you. So I think that relationship can also be a barrier.
That's really interesting to think about the developmental stages of students and how that lends itself or not to the cultivation of deeper empathy. And I think does touch on that self-awareness piece as well, hitting puberty phase and having everything turned upside down, and who am I, and how does that limit, empathy, or what kind of empathy is capable in that type of, developmental phase. That's interesting to think about. And a really interesting opportunity area actually to explore for teachers as well. I want to hear also Divya's perspective on this question, the barriers, and then we'll head to one more question before we wrap up. Divya, you've had so many incredible projects that you've done, and heard so many different stories. I'd love to hear kind of in your mind, what are some of the barriers you've seen to cultivating deeper empathy with users?
I completely agree, and I couldn't agree more with what Sara, Tristan, and Neil just said. I think the start and what kind of holds us back, especially in the classroom that we've seen, is what are some of the conditions or the pre-existing conditions that kind of hold the class back. And it starts with things like role modeling of the teacher. It starts with what artifacts are in the room. I've seen classrooms where you can just walk around a classroom and you can see what it's set up to do. So you take a look at the bookshelf, and I've seen classrooms where the bookshelf has a diverse set of authors, across countries and race and religions, and kind of those kind of artifacts can give you a really great clue as to whether the class is set up even for those conditions or those behaviors to be successful. And I think another kind of way that I've seen that helps kind of some of those barriers go down. And one of the barriers is not being able to kind of, for kids to be able to relate to it, to be kind of relate to another. And I've seen really great ways in which classrooms have embraced what's popular. So kind of taking the music of like Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar and kind of going back on why they kind of wrote music like that, and starting from that place to kind of go back into like what those stories are. From the design world itself, I think a really interesting way in which we kind of think about barriers is we do kind of hypothesis-driven design, where you start with a list of hypotheses about these are the things that I assume will be right, and you kind of use those hypotheses as driving questions to test your assumptions and test against some of those things. And getting them wrong is like just as deeply satisfying as getting those assumptions right. But that approach is really kind of is design driven, and I think is a great way to kind of break down barriers, to be open about what your assumptions are and start from there.
That's really interesting. That's another really interesting provocation for teachers to think about, is as they're designing solutions, have them think about the set of driving assumptions around their solution and continue to test them as they go and embark on their design journey. Which brings me really to my last question, which is about the design journey itself. And I'd love to hear really quick, we have this incredible network of educators out there right now who are optimistically setting forth on this design journey to cultivate deeper empathy in their classrooms and in their schools. And it's certainly an act of bravery to go out and do this and decide that you're going to prioritize this and share your idea out into the community for others to make it better. So with that, I'd love to hear from each of you just any little nugget of wisdom that you might and pass on to our teachers who are about to kind of hit the ideate phase with gusto. Would love to let's start with Sara. Any advice that you have for teachers right now who are just about to embark on this design journey?
Yeah, I think my advice would be embrace talking to your students about their future and their hopes and visions for the future. Some of the best conversations in my work come from that. And I think what is really important is to allow them the agency to be designers of that future. And it starts with a conversation about what their vision is, where they want to go. And the empathy part is where are we now and how do we want to feel, kind of where we want to design our way to.
I love that. Thank you. Neil, words of wisdom?
Sure. So it goes back to this idea about, building trust, as that foundation as you begin that journey. So, really make it, when I think about the flywheel, spinning that flywheel, make that first activity initiative something that is going to be an easy win and kind of builds momentum. And I think about, really to build trust and build that culture in that classroom is to really start, talking to students about hopes, fears, and dreams, regardless of what grade level that's in, and really then start to put that on the wall. Start to have kids really talk about that. But again, go into the why. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? And then and then the next part to start thinking about the other person is, how can we as a classroom help you achieve that? And really start to kind of help build and foster that. Put that on the bulletin board. Have that sent home to families and parents. Parents may get blown away because they may not know things about their own child. But let them be a part of that process too. And then just keep doing it. It's not a one-day activity. You do it in the fall and you never do it again. Make sure you just keep going.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Tristan, advice for all those educators out there who are about to embark on this quest?
I would say just do it. Find a way to incorporate it in your classroom and do it. And if you've never done it with your kids or you've never found ways to incorporate it, don't be discouraged that very first time when it may not go the way that you want it to, because it's going to be new for them too. And it's also going to be them seeing you in a new light. So they may not want to participate in the way that you think they should, or it's unfamiliar ground for them. So I would just say try it and keep trying and do reflection. And I have my kids reflect a lot as a group and as individuals. And I think that's also a way to really get the connection. Like it's a way to build in vulnerability and sharing without it being all about your emotions and feelings, just getting that practice in. So
I love that advice. Don't be discouraged by failure, which is a good one for teaching. There's a lot, many ways that something can go wrong. And then last but not least, Divya, I'd love any lasting words of advice for teachers out there.
I think it might be great for a teacher who feels that this is unfamiliar kind of territory to start with themselves, give themselves a challenge of getting to know someone either within their personal or professional context, or a parent or a student in a new way, and kind of embracing that with a lens of like trying to go outside the people they already know, and maybe even confront a certain awkwardness with somebody that you have, or somebody that you've had certain tensions with, and to kind of have a deep kind of immersive conversation where they're practicing to listen actively, they're practicing asking the right questions. I love kind of using the Proust questionnaire, which is the set of questions that a lot of celebrities answer online, and it's kind of all these really deep questions. But I think it's like a great guide to have a conversation with anyone. It could be your partner, your spouse, or it could be your sibling, it could be, but I think it's interesting to kind of start with somebody you feel a little uncomfortable with, and see what that process feels like for yourself, and not kind of just the asking of the questions, but how you have to kind of hold back your responses or your assumptions, and start with yourself and kind of take those experiences and share it with students.
Great advice. Well, that brings us to the end of this expert chat, and I just want to say thank you again for giving us your time this evening to chat with us about empathy, how it happens, its dimensions, and opportunities for teachers out there. I want to just again say thank you. This was such a privilege to be a part of this conversation, and I feel like there's so many different things I'm thinking about, and hopefully all of our teachers out there who have the chance to listen to this will be inspired as well. And I want to end by just encouraging educators listening to go out and post a solution, even if it's half-baked. You've probably got a great idea in there, and it's just waiting to be shared and to be built on top of, so don't hold back. And I also want to share that we are doing another campaign called #KnowMyStory, which is another opportunity to model being vulnerable and to sharing something about yourself and to cultivate that self-awareness. So jump into that really great opportunity too. It's a great learning opportunity. So thanks so much for, again, being a part of this, to all the panelists, and we are so grateful for you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.